The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands and millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is day 3 of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in February 2019. And I want to say something about how the day has been going, and actually how the days have been going, except yesterday when our construction crew was not here. I'll preface this by saying that in Rochester, at the Rochester Zen Center, where I trained for almost 20 years, everything was exceedingly finely tuned to help people simply go within themselves without any interruption whatsoever. They sat the Soto style, which was facing the wall, and there was not a single mirror in the place. There were coverings over all the windows. You were to keep your eyes down. There was to be no speaking whatsoever, and it was quite strict. If you needed to communicate, there were pads and paper and pencils around. The only place you could talk, and even that was most likely not necessary, was in Doksan. And so it was quite effective in a certain way. People were able to go fairly deep in sesshin because there was absolutely nothing to distract you except your own makyo, of course. And the only thing is, at the end of sesshin, when you're back out in society, it's like, oh my God, can somebody slow this thing down? And but here and there, people managed. Interestingly enough, once Mitra-roshi began doing sesshin, which he did for 2 or 3 years in a row in the summers at Bodhimanda, which was called Bodhimandala back then, over in the Jemez in New Mexico, which we rented from a Rinzai group for the sesshin, and it was extremely different from Rochester. First of all, the storms would come raging up the canyon in the afternoon, and with thundering thunder, deafening thunder, and winds that blew straight horizontally, the rain, including whatever there was caught in it, leaves, insects, whatever, all came flying in. And it was usually in June and July that we would do those sesshins, and so that's when the June bugs would come out, and there were millions of them, and our beds would be full of June bugs. And on top of that, the residents of Bodhi would stay there during that time, and actually during one of our sesshin, during the work period of one of their sesshin, the Bodhi women came down to soak in the hot springs that were also on the property, and they happened to come down right when there was a work party weeding around the hot springs, and they stripped naked and went in for their soak. And this was on the 6th or 7th day of sesshin, when everybody is quite sensitive and aware. And the work party was, if I remember right, it was all guys. Interestingly enough, one member of the work party actually had a kensho that day, perhaps as a result. We don't know. But at any rate, what was happening was that people were coming out from Rochester to these sesshin, and they were having kensho experiences left and right, because there was nothing they could count on in terms of any sensory deprivation, any schedule, anything. Suddenly there was nothing in their control, and they had to open up to a different way of experiencing sesshin. Then I went to live and train at Sogenji. And at Sogenji, first of all kinds of things are going on during the day at that temple. It used to be way out in the countryside back when Hakuin would go there, not to train but to teach. And by the time I went, of course, it was surrounded by houses, and there was all kinds of activity. There was a group of local women that would come and bring their toddlers to play there on the property. And so there were children's voices and mothers' voices and so on. During the election seasons, a typical election way of going about getting people to vote for you is to drive around in a car. Actually, I don't think they drove around the car. I think they hired people to drive around in a car with a loudspeaker on it, or it would just be the name of the person and then thank you in Japanese. So something like Kunitomi, arigatou gozaimasu. Kunitomi, arigatou gozaimasu. Kunitomi, arigatou gozaimasu. Kunitomi, arigatou gozaimasu. Constantly for hours. And of course, if there were several people running for office and that were plying the neighborhood, you got all kinds of noise like that with different voices saying thank you. And then during sale season, some of the stores would hire an airplane to fly overhead, which also then advertised through loudspeaker whatever it was that was on sale. You had people coming up to hike up the trails behind Sogenji on the mountain, and some of them would pop their heads into the zendo to check things out and maybe ask a question. In addition to that, the tenzo of the day was tasked with not only getting all the meals on the table on time, but also answering the telephone in Japanese and answering the doorbell. And many people came to Sogenji because it began to become famous. So there were always distractions. And yet the tenzo of the day had to start the sanzen. They were the first person into sanzen after setting up the cushions in the sanzen waiting room and the sanzen room itself. They were the first person to go into sanzen. They were also the first person in the evening to go in sanzen. So they had to keep it together, keep the practice going all day long. And what I noticed when I first arrived was that people they would talk during the sesshin. There was nothing about you're not supposed to talk actually, but people would do it anyway. And they would pop out of kinin and mix a bowl of matcha, the green whisk tea, or drink some coffee or whatever, and it was a fairly casual situation. However, going into sanzen, you couldn't be casual. You had to have gone deeply with commitment into your practice. And what I witnessed was that with all of that stuff going on outside, people had to learn to practice in a different way than they had to learn to practice in Rochester, where everything was laid out for them to have no interruptions whatsoever. And while it took longer for their practice to go deep, it was solidly deep when it went. And this is why we have not canceled the construction work during sesshin, to give each one of us an opportunity to practice in the midst of activity, which is, as Hakuin said many times, 10,000 times, 10,000 times that of seated zazen. It's far more effective, just as the difference between how it was in Rochester, where everything was ideal for practice theoretically. But when you went out of sesshin, it was a shock. And yet at Sogenji, you had to learn to, I call it surf. the situation, and keep your practice going. And that doesn't mean to keep going moo, 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 if you're working on moo. It means being so totally present with whatever it is that is happening in that moment that you're naturally working on moo. It sounds like a contradiction, but we want to focus deeply on the practice when it is time to focus deeply on the practice, and the practice becomes outside of the zendo and outside of other circumstances where it is optimal to practice, where you've got some quiet or you've got a single moment in which to just do a breath and dive into that yearning, that searching sense that will bring you into touch with that mu or that face before your parents were born, or who you are. The rest of the time, your practice is to be totally present with what is, with the sensations in your body, with the feelings, with the judgments, to recognize that there may be some, and to use that lever as a way to take yourself deeper. Search for the true person of no rank, who is always there, no matter what the activity. Whether it's sitting silently on the cushion or in the chair, or whether it's engaging with banter with some of the construction guys, or whether it's preparing food, or whether it's sitting late doing yaza, whether it's enjoying your tea suite at the end of the evening, the formal sitting. Whatever it is, to be truly there. And when we're truly there, there's nobody doing whatever it is that is being truly there. So I wanted to say that because it's quite important in terms of our being able to bring the fruits of our practice, not only our practice itself, into our daily life, whatever we are doing. And in America these days, there's very little monastic Zen. And even what monastic Zen there is usually temporary. People coming for weeks, days, months, years to the monastery and then going out into the world, maybe coming back, maybe not. Doing sesshin whenever they can, according to their schedule, living out in the world, making a living, having families, having their challenges at work, their challenges in their families perhaps, their challenges in life in general. When we practice in every moment, as we get the chance to, particularly while this construction is going on and you're hearing the sound of power tools, earlier this afternoon, they were waxing the floor, which brings me to another point. There's rather a large space of freshly waxed brick right before and after the door at the end of the hallway, so we need to jump over it, take the great leap, so to speak, to avoid marking the wax until it's dried, and then it can be polished. But they were doing a lot of essential work and making different kinds of noises, and it's all part of a package of learning how to practice in daily life, and not having practice and daily life be two separate things, because that's not Zen. Practice in the midst of activity is 10,000 times that more valuable. It's also more difficult than sitting zazen. This is 360-degree practices, which what we're about here at Mountain Gate. And now I'd like to share with you some of the teachings of Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, who was a Sufi mystic in, what his date? Sometime around shortly after Dogen in Japan. Only he was in the Middle East. He was apparently Persian, but ended up dying in Turkey. In Konya, is his tomb. And he was, I would say, a deeply realized human being. And he tried to express that realization and tried to teach people through poetry. And so now I'd like to share some of his poetry from a book called The Essential Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks, who's a premier translator of Rumi. The first is Be Melting Snow. Totally conscious and apropos of nothing, you come to see me. Is someone here, I ask? The moon. The full moon is inside your house. My friends and I go running out into the street. I'm in here, comes a voice from the house. We aren't listening. We're looking up at the sky. My pet nightingale sobs like a drunk in the garden. Ringdoves scatter with small cries. Where? It's midnight. The whole neighborhood is up and out in the street, thinking the cat burglar has come back. The actual thief is there now, also saying out loud, yes, the cat burglar is somewhere in this crowd, but no one pays attention. Lo, I am with you always, means when you look for God, God is in the look of your eyes, in the thought of looking nearer to you than yourself, or things that have happened to you. There's no need to go outside. Be melting snow. Wash yourself of yourself. A white flower grows in the quietness. Let your tongue become that flower. And here, of course, he is pointing out how we seek outside of ourselves for what can be nowhere else but right here. That's why you extend the out-breath, tuning in to the physical experience and the yearning to know, to understand, to become free. And as you continue that over and over and over again, gradually you do wash yourself of yourself. This next one is called, it doesn't have a title. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Out beyond wrongdoing and right-doing. Out beyond judgments. The great teachers have all said, only don't know, or beginner's mind. When we go beyond our thoughts, our ideas, our words, that is where the answers lie, beyond words. And the breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the doorsill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. we are open to hearing them. But if our mind is full of ideas about things, or concerns about the future or the past, we're not going to be able to hear it. But if we are allowing ourselves to be totally present, a glimmer of understanding begins to come. As we do this over and over and over again, the true person of no rank begins to become revealed before our very eyes. Thank you for listening, and we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.